Hello, hello. We're gonna give everyone another 4 minutes. Enough time to grab a second cup of coffee. Friday morning breakfast snack. I'll be back. For those of you guys who are here, if you want to put your first and last name in the chat, well, when I save it, I have like a little record of who was here on time, all that good stuff. We'll get started in another minute or two. Good morning, good morning. If you guys want to put your name in the chat to show me that you're here, that would be great. Okay, so we are a third of the way through the semester, if you can believe that. Things are moving along. So I'm going to talk through some things on Canvas, some things that are coming up, things that you need to be aware of, and then we'll get started with our discussion of our paper today, which I know everyone is super excited about. Okay, so we are already in class 5. Let me go back to the home page here for a second. Chat up. Okay, so we're already here. We did week 1, week 2, week 3. Last week we had our first literature discussion, and in your asynchronous material you talked about, or you learned about statistics, right? So we're here week 5 for our second literature discussion. Before this class you needed to have read a paper. It is this paper on binge eating in mice. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about it. And you have a summary and analysis of this paper that you will work on after class that's due Sunday. The other thing that was due yesterday is a lab report edit. So if you click on this assignment, as you remember, you had to download this lab report, download this rubric first, read through the lab report draft and grade it using that rubric, and then make the corrections to the draft and upload both your rubric and your draft that's been corrected. And then what you were assigned is a peer review. So you were assigned someone's draft to look at, and what I want you to do basically is make sure that they caught all the same mistakes that you did. So go through it and give them some more feedback. Okay, you also have a journal prompt due Sunday. So your peer review and your journal prompt are due Sunday. Peer review, so your edits to an edited lab report go here. And basically what I'm trying to show you guys is that writing is a process. It's not something you just do and you finish, but instead it's something that you can continually improve upon, okay? So we're here in class 5. For the class 5 attendance quiz, what I want you guys to do is to rate what you thought of this paper on a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 being it was poop, it was the worst thing I've ever read in my entire life, and 10 being it was an amazing, it was the best paper I've ever read. It changed how I thought about everything, and there are no improvements that could have been made. So give it a 1 to a 10 under class 5 attendance quiz, again under that class 5 agenda. And when you're done with the attendance quiz, I want you to put your number in the chat. So tell me what you thought. And while you guys do that, I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint here. So take a minute, give that attendance quiz. Okay, tell me what you thought about it. Give me your score in the chat. So Kylie's giving it a 7 out of 10, a respectable 7 out of 10. Agrees, 7 out of 10. Yuffie says, you know, I would agree. So everyone's saying a 7. Someone could be different. You know, you don't have to say 7. You could give it a 6. Khalil's giving it a 6, an 8. 8. Okay. You don't also have to listen to exactly what I say. You could just do whatever you want. Okay. So it seems to be around a 7 or an 8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background on some key parts of the paper, and then we're going to have a discussion. And so if you remember from last week, in a paper discussion, I'm going to ask people to tell me about the different sections of the paper. And so what that will involve is you unmuting yourself and talking about that section. So emotionally prepare yourself. That's coming up. It's not as scary as it sounds. I'm going to share PowerPoint and talk a little bit about some of what I think are the trickier concepts here. Okay, so we've arrived at our second literature discussion. And our objective for today's class is to analyze and critique a scientific paper. And this is the paper that we're talking about. So it's binge eating behavior in socially isolated female mice. And I thought that this was a really relevant paper, especially for what we're all going through. You know, social isolation is on the rise, and it's important to understand what kind of ramifications that can have. And so yes, this is looking at mice and not people, but I think you can still draw connections and draw conclusions. Similarly to our last paper, this is an undergraduate author, so this is published in the Journal of Young Investigators. The first author, again, is the person who did all the work, so that's Jenny Cry. She is the undergraduate student at the Western Connecticut State University in Danbury, Connecticut, and her professor is Joshua Cordero. He is the person who paid for it. And so the first author did the work, the last author supplied the money by and large. Okay. And I asked you guys to read or at least skim through 2 bits of background reading. And the reason I did this is because, one, when you're reading a paper, it's important to look at the papers that they cite, especially in the introduction. And this can help you understand what the gap in knowledge is. So what did these other previous works do, and what is left to be done and remains to be explored, right? So previous papers, this one looked at rats for binge dieting. Importantly, it looked at male rats. And this one looked at mice, and it kind of explored aging and gender differences in feeding behavior in socially isolated mice. So it's a similar paper. And so what I wanted you to do is at least read that to see how different is what she's doing based on what has previously been done, or is Jenny more copying what's been done previously. So I want you guys to have an awareness of what that gap in knowledge is. So some key concepts that this paper explores. So they look at the effects of social isolation and depression. They say that loneliness is a risk factor for depression, which again is something I think we're all aware of, and that this can be comorbid with eating disorders. And comorbid means that you see these 2 things together. So you'll see people who have depression have a higher risk of having an eating disorder, and vice versa. This they found to be more common in women than in men. And they measured depression with a tail suspension test, and they did some binge eating. And we'll look at some videos for the tail suspension test, because I think it is
Welcome to Maze Engineers.
Important.
Maze Basics Tail Suspension.
Let me try to pause that. Okay. So we're gonna, okay, sorry, I got a lot of tabs. Okay. So we're gonna look at what this tail suspension test is, because it's not something I think most people are familiar with.
The tail suspension test is great for measuring acute depression. The apparatus is a large box that has a hook hanging down from the ceiling. Rodents' tails are taped to the hook such that they are securely hanging without any damage to the skin, and so that they are unable to touch the walls of the compartment. The tail suspension test typically runs for 6 minutes, during which the duration of agitation and immobility are measured. Agitation is characterized by the natural behavioral response of the animal to try to escape, such as twisting and curling. Immobility is when the animal stops struggling to escape and essentially gives up on the task. These 2 phases.
Okay, so basically they're going to hang a mouse or a rat by its tail, and if the mouse is a normal mouse, he will spend a fair amount of time moving around trying to escape and then eventually give up. And depressed mice give up faster, so they're less agitated to begin with, and they have a faster time to immobility, a faster time to give up, because they're depressed. Okay. Let me pull up the second video. Okay. I'm going to turn the sound off, but this is just showing you what the rat actually looks like. So it's struggling, trying to get up. Yeah. And again, you're videotaping this and you're timing until it stops moving, like you see there. Okay. So, go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so those are the 2 tests that we were studying. They also did statistics, so keep in mind from our statistics lessons, right? Student t-test to see the difference between 2 means, again, assuming a normal distribution. And they did an ANOVA, which analyzes multiple means looking for variance. They did a post-test afterwards to see what is correlated with what. So what we're going to do now is we're going to discuss different parts of the paper. But I want to give you guys a few minutes to just remind yourself of what this paper covered before we start the super fun game everyone's looking forward to, where I call on you and ask you to talk about things. So from now until 10:25, read the paper to yourself, familiarize yourself with the different parts of the paper, and then I will call on you. If you want to turn your video on, you can, but just be prepared to at least turn your sound on when I say your name. So from now to 10:25, remind yourself of what the paper covered. Okay, we're gonna get started. So how we're gonna do this is I'll just go down like the little list, and the first person, I'll ask you to summarize a section. So tell me something about that section. And the second person will provide an analysis. So what did they do right? What did they do wrong? Based on those analysis questions that we've been practicing. So Kylie, do you want to start us off by telling us about the introduction and what the hypothesis or hypotheses of the paper were?
Okay, so the general topic was depression and its ties to binge eating in females, specifically mice. And it talked about social isolation and how it has very strong ties to depression.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why the study was undertaken is because women are twice as likely as men to be diagnosed with depression and are more susceptible to binge eating disorder, but not as much research has been done on females as on men.
Great. So that's the gap in knowledge, right? Is that even though women are more common in this category, not as much work has been done looking just at females. Great. So what was their hypothesis? What did they think was going to happen?
They thought that the mice who were isolated would become depressed and they would partake in binge eating.
Great. So there are two things they're looking for, right? Depression and binge eating. Awesome job, Kylie. Amy, do you want to tell us your analysis of the introduction? What do you think they did well? What do you think they could have improved upon? Do you think they laid out a strong enough gap in knowledge?
Okay, so for my analysis of this paper, let me bring up my questions really quick. So I think that they did present a pretty strong case, even though that there hasn't been too much research on this topic. I did think that they did present it and how they explained it. Also their references.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm kind of bringing up everything on my computer.
You're good. You're good. So you
so
felt like they did a good job explaining why this was important, and you felt like it
yes,
resonated with you, and you would have done that.
Yep, and throughout the entire paper, they really did a good job of tying it all back in.
So good structure of the paper.
Yes, very good structure of the paper.
Okay, awesome. So you want to tell us about the method? So how did they measure binge eating? How did they measure depression? And what was their experimental setup like? Are you there? I'll give him 2 more seconds and then I'll move on. Raquel, do you want to tell us about, okay, is your audio working? I'm trying to unmute. So there should be a button on the bottom left corner that says mute or unmute. Oh, you're unmuted, Go for it. I think you are unmuted now. Okay, let's try this. Why don't you type your answers tell us about the methods in a text, and Raquel, if you want to tell us what you thought of their methods. What was your analysis? Oh. Raquel, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, go for it.
Which part?
Tell
summary
me
or
the analysis of the methods. What do you feel like they did right? What do you feel like they did wrong?
Okay, so I think they did right dividing the mice in individually house and pair house.
Mm-hmm.
And they also introduced high fat food, which on the other articles that we had to read, they said that high fat food induced binge eating.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this made mice to eat more to do the binge eating
because of the food. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think they did right. I don't think they did anything wrong here.
Okay.
Oh, also they do the tail suspension test.
Yeah.
Which to measure if they were for how long they were moving and for how long they were not moving. Maybe this was I don't know if they stated why they did this.
That was their measure of depression.
To measure depression, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know about that part.
Yeah, so let's think about that for a second. So one of the things that's always tricky when you do research with rodents, especially, is that you're trying to ascribe or relate human behavior to what a mouse is doing. And sometimes it's like, yeah, okay, I can see that. And other times it's hard to make that leap. And the tricky bit with depression is, in mice, is what you're measuring. Are they depressed? Are they anxious? Are they bored? You can't really say. You can't say why they gave up. So gave us some details here that I'll just read to you guys about the methods again. So they used 21 mice and they put them into alternating light dark groups. Some were coupled, some were individually paired. Great. And they had the high fat food, and then they did the tail suspension after 4 weeks. So they let them be alone and binge eat, and then they did the tail suspension test. So again, good job, with the methods. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. Were they immobile because they were anxious? Were they immobile because they were depressed? Were they immobile because they were bored? Were they immobile because they were tired?
Maybe they could have used another method to measure depression
Yeah.
other than that one.
Yeah. A lot of times in bigger papers, they'll measure depression in multiple ways. And so they'll show not just a tail suspension test, but they have like they call it a water test where they measure how long they swim until they give up swimming, or they put them through a maze. Do they give up when they can't find the food in the maze? And so they do all sorts of other tests to confirm, and that makes it a stronger case when you see like multiple ways confirming the same result. Okay, so that is our summary analysis of the methods. Kylie, do you want to tell us about the first figure? What does the first figure show?
Just give me 1 second.
Okay, you're good. I don't know if you can see that.
Okay, so the first figure is the social isolation produced depressive-like behavior in the tail suspension test, and it's showing the pH are the pair housed, and then the IH is the individually housed, and it's showing that for the individually housed mice were immobile more than the pair housed mice, but it wasn't that big of a difference.
For the immobility, yeah. So what Kylie's noticing is that those bars are pretty close together, right? If we're looking especially at 1B. Good job. So the other thing I want you guys to notice is the asterisk that you're going to see over the individual house. And that asterisk is a sign of statistical significance. And so if you read in the figure legend, it says that's from a student t-test of a p-value less than 0.05. So that's saying that those two groups are statistically significantly different from each other, right? Or that there is a less than 5% chance that you would see those variables, those numbers, by chance, right? So if there is some meaning behind those two groups, there is some difference between the two groups, right? And so both figure A and figure B are statistically significant. And you might look at that and say, well, A, yes, those bars are different from each other. You can see that by eye. But B doesn't seem to be the case. But what I want you to notice is the error bars. So the error bars on a graph are going to show you standard deviation. And what figure A has, while the means of the bars themselves are pretty different from each other, showing that on average, the latency was pretty decreased in the individually housed compared to in the paired house. The error bars, especially for paired house, is big. So there's a high variability. And whenever you have a high variability, it's going to be harder to find a statistical significance, just because if the group is experiencing a large range, right, it's hard to say, oh, is it different from this other set of numbers? They kind of overlap. There's a big range. It makes it so that it's usually less statistically significant. Whereas in B, you can see that the error bars there are really small, right? So that means that, yes, the difference is small, but most of the animals behaved more similarly to the mean, okay? So that's a good job for figure 1. Amy, I'm gonna get to you with figure 2. you're gonna be for figure 3. So if you wanna start typing what figure 3 shows us while Amy tells us about figure 2. So Amy, go for it.
Okay, so for figure 2, it is talking about how the isolation and about the binge eating testing. So if you see in like figure A, within like the first 7.5 minutes within that time frame that they gave them to eat, the individually housed mice are increased they ate a lot more of the food, and then they trickled off
Yes, exactly.
the rest of the time, versus the paired housing is, of course, they ate some of the food, but it wasn't as much as the individually housed, and then it kind of just trickled a little bit more, I guess I would say,
Yeah.
than the individually housed.
Mm-hmm. And then what is figure
And
B showing us?
so figure B, let me increase this image really quick. So it's talking about the cumulative intake, so the amount of calories that they intaked over the amount of binge eating test time. So the individually housed ones are, of course, more, and then it trickled off as like the same with the other graph in A.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the paired housing, it was less than the individually housed ones.
Mm-hmm. Great. So let's talk a little bit. So Amy made the point exactly, right? So the socially isolated mice, the ones that were individually housed, they ate more right at the beginning. So the high-fat food was introduced, and they had a much larger binge at the beginning compared to the paired house, the ones that were not feeling that isolation. And so if we're looking at that figure, again, the asterisks that you're going to see in the first set of bars between 0 and 7.5 minutes, that's saying that the paired house was different from the individually housed in that specific time period. So in that time period, we're looking at a difference of less than 0.05. Now, you got to kind of follow the rest of them. So the cross that's above both bars for the 0 to 7.5 is a different test, and this is looking at the function of time. So was the variable of time significant? So was there a difference between what they did in early time points versus later time points? We can see that by eye, that like for both groups, obviously they were doing different things in the beginning than they were at the end, but that's just the statistical analysis saying that their eating behavior is a function of time, is correlated to time, right? That the early behavior is different from the late behavior. So the first asterisk is saying the individually housed are different from the paired house, and that cross is saying that there is a difference as a function of time, that early is different from late. And you see over the 15 to 30, we have like a hashtag, right? And that is saying that there's a significance, but it's not quite as significant. So the difference there between individually housed and pair housed is only 0.10, not 0.05. Remember, for p-values, the smaller the better, because what a p-value is saying is that's the percent chance that you can see that what you would see is happening by chance, as opposed to representing an actual difference in the groups. So for the first one, if it's 0.05, that means there's a 5% chance that you would get this data assuming the null hypothesis, assuming that there was no difference between the group and it just happened randomly. For 15 to 30, we're only at a p-value of 0.1, so that's a 10% chance that you would see that randomly. So we're less confident in that because of that statistical analysis. And then again, from 30 to 60, we see that asterisk, again, saying we're more confident in the difference we're seeing here, okay? And then we're looking in figure B. Again, they showed us just the summary of the individual versus the paired house. Great job. Okay. So told us about figure 3. He said figure 3 shows us the calorie intake doesn't affect body weight on the high-fat foods, that they're comparing the binge eating and the intake of the week. Exactly. So in figure A, right, total food intake, they ate more. The socially isolated mice did eat more, but part B shows us that there was no difference in body weight. So their binge eating didn't change their body weight. Now this could be because they maybe had a higher metabolism because of their anxiety and their isolation, or it could be that we didn't follow them long enough. So we only did the study for 4 weeks, maybe at 8 weeks or 12 weeks, we would see an effect on body weight if they kept going with the high-fat binge food. Okay, so Raquel, do you want to tell us about their discussion? What did they talk about in their discussion?
So they, as you mentioned, they concluded that both mice increased their weight due to their eating, but um, it is also important to notice that binge eating episodes might be present in overweight, but they say that only 40% of binge eaters are overweight.
Yeah, so it's not,
So
it's you can't look at someone and tell if they have a binge eating problem or not. You can't. Good
right.
point. Anything else you want to add about the discussion?
And yeah, they also concluded that depression on isolated mice where it was higher. They presented depression more than the other paired house mice.
Great. So the reason I chose this paper again, I think we all did a good job talking through the different parts, right, is because I felt like it was pretty relevant to what's happening today, and also a pretty easy to understand paper. So slightly more difficult than the one we talked about last week, right, which used humans and listen to music and anxiety. A little bit more complicated, but still pretty straightforward, okay? And so what I'm going to ask you guys next, for those of you who need to type your answers, is what experiment would you like to see done next based on this data? What do you want the research group to look at next? Kylie, I'm coming to you first. What do you think that they should look at next based on what we just talked about?
Maybe like the recovery time of the depression. So how long it takes the mouse to get back to normal after returning from isolation.
Great. So how would you continue to use the tail suspension test? Would you measure, how often would you do that? You're setting up your experiment. What do you think?
I don't know. Maybe like once every 2 weeks.
Once every 2 weeks, yeah, and just see when it returns to baseline. That's a good idea. Okay, Amy, coming to you. An experiment you want to try?
From this one, I would almost see how they would react to like maybe a healthier food introduced to them instead of like a high fat food, and see how that would affect like the isolation period, or like how it would affect their mood and like their immobility and stuff like that.
Great. So maybe like, can we recover some of that bad depression with healthy food?
Yeah.
Or did I put words in your mouth? Is that what you want to look at?
Yeah, that's about like what I was trying to explain.
Yeah. Okay. So how often would you test their mood if you're giving them healthy food? Like how long would you let their diet all change before you tested them again?
I think I would probably keep like the experiment. So like, maybe bring them out of isolation every 4 weeks and test them to see how that would affect them. But other than that, I wouldn't really change anything.
Okay.
Other than like the food aspect of it, to see if that is like a contribution to depression.
So great. So the other thing you want to keep in mind when you do that is you want to have a control group where you don't change the food, right? So that way you can see, oh, their depression is improving, and we know it's improving because the groups that were still eating high-fat food, they did not improve, they got worse, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Good experiment. Okay, Erm wants to look at both males and females. So this just looked at females. He wants to repeat these tests, I assume, with both males and females and see if there's a difference. That's a good idea. Raquel? I know going last means ideas.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I would put both groups like in a little workout area with a little wheel that mice do like to work out, to see how they react to, and with little toys, like I don't know what mice use, to little balls, I don't know.
They actually have little mice, not just wheels, but they have little mouse treadmills too.
Oh yeah, that, to see how they react to it, because maybe the depressed ones wouldn't want to do that, maybe the others would,
Mhm.
and also to see if they could lose the weight that they gain and how they react to it, and maybe this could be useful to measure if they their depression too.
Great. So see, is there a benefit to exercise both for mental health and for physical health?
Yes.
That's awesome. Good idea. Okay, so whenever we talk about these papers, again, we're thinking about summary. So like what happened, what did we see, and then analysis, right? What could be improved upon? What did they do well? What did they not do well? So based on all of that, if you guys want to put a scale 1 to 10, what you now think of the paper, 1 being absolute garbage and 10 being the best paper I've ever read in my entire life. And we'll see if that changed from before. 8, 7.5 to 8. Okay, so we agree it's a little bit better than we thought. It's a pretty good job. 8. Okay. So that is today's discussion. I want to talk about what we're doing next week. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Okay, let me pull up my chat here. Great. So next week, we're going to be doing an activity, and the activity involves a deck of cards. So before class next week, I ask that you there's a reading assignment. It says pre-class 6. I want you to read through this handout so that you're prepared, and then also get a deck of playing cards. I have a few of them, but for you guys, the virtual group, there's no way for me to give you cards, right? So you have to have your own cards. And what we'll do is we'll do a lab activity, and then your asynchronous material will be about the method section. And slowly, we're building up a lab report here. We're going bit by bit, right, getting it all together. Are there any questions that you guys have about what you got to do this week, what you got to do next week? The other thing I sent out in the announcement was about the schedule of the class. So I had a very fun experience on Wednesday where it was a virtually empty classroom. And it's hard to have a paper discussion when no one shows up. So instead, what I would like to do is just have one in-person session. You do have a question beyond me. Okay, thank you, Evie. To have one in-person session and one virtual session. So next week, we are closed. The university is closed on Monday, so obviously we'll only meet on Wednesday or the virtual group Friday. But for the weeks that follow, I would like to just have a Monday group and a Friday group. Monday being in-person, Friday being virtual. For you guys, you would just continue to come virtually, but if you wanted an in-person experience, you could come on Monday. If that works for you guys, I'm going to do it. If it doesn't work, please tell me either by words from your mouth or in the chat or an email or something. And otherwise, you guys are good to go. Enjoy your weekend. Be safe. Be smart. And I'll see you next week.
I have a question about the peer review.
Yes.
Is the score that we're giving to our partner is gonna affect them, or we're just okay.
No. Yeah, you're not actually grading them. You're just pointing out things that they missed. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a question about the peer review.
Yeah, Kylie.
How will we get the paper?
Like your paper or the one you're supposed to look at?
The one we're supposed to look at.
So when you open up your Canvas and you click on the course, on the right-hand side, you should have something that says like to-do list, right? And on your to-do list, you should have a thing that says peer review. And then I also sent out, like I did a thing that says like remind the person. And so you should get like an email or something that says you have a peer review waiting for you. Did you get that?
I got it on my email.
You got an email, Raquel?
Yeah.
Kylie, did you get an email?
I can check my email right now. I don't think I got an email. I remember seeing the notification twice.
Okay.
But it never, like whenever I clicked on it, it just took me to the assignment that we turned in last night.
Okay. If you don't see it when you look on your Canvas shell, like on the to-do list, you don't see anything and you don't see an email me and I will email it to you, and we'll just like do it the long way, if that works. Kylie, you good?
I'm looking on
Oh, you're
Canvas
looking.
right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to share your screen?
Just give me 1 second. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. You're good. I always end class early, so we got time. Let me show you while you look for it. Let me show you something. Okay.
Okay.
So if I'm on Canvas, I'm going to click on Student View, because right now it shows you my to-do list. So on the side, so like if you're on your course, right, Bio 4700-004, blah, blah, blah. This thing has a to-do list. And you should see a bunch of stuff here. If you've already done them, hit the X, and eventually something should pop up here that says peer review.
Okay.
You might not see it on the phone. I don't know if you're looking on your phone right now or if you're looking.
No, I brought my laptop with me. I just didn't know if it would tether to my phone because I'm in a building that has like a tin roof. So I didn't know if I would have enough service for my Wi-Fi to like work.
Worked out though, right?
Yes, it did. Okay. Okay. Because whenever I just do it from the dashboard, it doesn't come up. So now I know how to do it. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
No, that's it. Have a nice day.
You too. Enjoy your weekend.